Hi everybody, Mrs. TOMITA here. In this video, I'm going to show you how to draw different hair textures and styles. And you don't need to watch the whole entire thing. Feel free to skip around and just find the parts that are useful for you. And these are by no means every hairstyle ever. It's just a few of the common ones that people would probably want to see drawn. So if you have any that aren't in this video that you would like to know about, just let me know and I'm sure that I could show you how to draw them. So as you can see, I have already drawn just a few models for our hair. I've done different skin tones and I have a reference sheet here of different hairstyles that I'm gonna kind of base these looks on. So the first hairstyle that I'm going to show you is dreadlocks. With each of these styles, the first thing I'm going to do is kind of outline where the hair is. So I'm not worrying about the texture, I'm just lining the outside of the hair. Notice that I'm drawing above the actual head because rarely is your hair exactly flush with your head. So I am just lightly sketching in an outline of where my hair will be. And the hair may also go in front of the ear or in front of the face in different ways. So I'm also overlapping that hair in front of the face and just erasing the parts and those details that I don't need anymore. So now that I pretty much have the outline, I can start splitting this area up into the actual locks themselves. So you could think of locks as being either like long rectangle shapes or kind of like cylinders. So I'm just breaking all of this space up into the individual locks. So like I said, these are just kind of like rectangles, or once we add value, they'll turn into cylinders. So we started with this rectangle shape. The next thing I'm going to do is outline it again, but just with a more textured line. You don't want it to be a perfect wavy line or a perfect zigzag. You want something a little more random that will show more organic texture. So I have done that, and now I am just going back and forth on the dread itself to add some texture. So these lines kind of follow the curve, just like as if you were shading a sphere. And then I just went along the edges to add a darker line. That shows the value, and it looks like there is kind of that shadow wrapping around. So now I'm going to just kind of outline each lock with that more organic line that I just showed you. And now is also the point where if you wanted to add the cool like jewelry and decorations that are sometimes on locks, you could do that as well. It's just kind of a band that wraps around the lock, depending on what kind of style you're doing. So now I've gone and added that textured line around each lock, and I can take my eraser and go back in and get rid of any outstanding lines. Those initial sketchy, really rectangular lines don't need to be there anymore. And now it's time for me to add the texture and dimension. So I'm just kind of lightly going over each lock with those curved lines that show dimension. And I'm going to do that with each and every single lock that I have. So now that I've added those lines to all of my locks, I can go back in and add the darker value along the edges. So I'm kind of using that hatching technique, and I'm just working my way on both sides, but not the middle of each lock. This creates the illusion of form and makes each of these locks look 3D. And now that I've added that value on most of the locks, I can add some finishing details. So you will generally have a shadow on the underside of your hair. So kind of along your neck and jawline, your hair will be darker because you'll have a cast shadow from your face. Along the face, you may also have some cast shadows from the locks themselves. And I also added some baby hairs. Sometimes those will be showing as well. Here are my finished locks. And now I'm going to show you some straight, shorter hair. I'm going to start by just showing you what the outline will look like. So your hair does grow in front of your ears. It doesn't grow in a perfectly straight line across your head unless you get it lined up. And it also grows above your head. So as you can see, I've added the outline of where my hair will be, and then you can kind of get rid of any other lines that you don't need, like the line that was the top of the head. The first thing I'm doing is I'm just laying down a general value and then blending it with my finger. Then I can add some texture lines. This person's hair, they are wearing to the side, so I'm drawing lines that show the direction of it. They also have shorter hair on the sides of their head, so I added some shorter lines there. And right now I'm just kind of going back and forth between adding the texture lines and blending, and adding the lines and blending some more. And remember that value contrast is going to be what's going to kind of give you a little more depth and dimension. So if you pull out some areas that are darker with your pencil, and you could also use your eraser to pull out more highlights to create areas that are lighter. I'm also going around the edge of my hair just to add a little more detail. I don't want it to be a perfectly straight line, so I added some texture. You also might have a shadow on your face where the hair is creating a cast shadow. And there is some finished straight short hair. So I did show you some short hair, but now I'm going to show you short hair that is not worn to the side. So I'm going to start with the hairline, which for a lot of people is halfway between the top of the head and the eyes. It's different for everyone. And I'm just drawing some short lines all throughout the head. So keep in mind that when you have short hair and you don't purposefully make it go in a different direction, it generally grows from the back of the head forward. But then on the side of the head, it would grow downward. So I'm just going to keep on adding these short lines. And also, unless you've gotten it styled to be so, your hairline is not actually a perfectly straight line. Lots of times you'll have maybe some short hair growing over top of it, but I erased my line so I just don't have a super thick line in that spot. So I just worked my way around the head with those short lines to create a very short, straight hairstyle. So now I'm going to show you some longer and wavier hair. This one actually took me a few tries, so that's why you can kind of tell I've been doing some erasing around the head. But I think I figured out a good way to show you how to do it. So here's my reference picture. And I'm not going to make my hair quite as long because I have a different head model underneath that I don't want to overlap on top of. So just like I did with the previous two hairstyles, I'm going to start with the outline of my hair. So with wavy hair, this outline will definitely not be perfectly straight. You're going to kind of work back and forth with your waves. And then the bottoms of your hair will also not be perfectly straight. They kind of come to points. Also, notice that I'm not drawing right on top of where the top of my head is, but I'm drawing a little bit above it. That's because your hair generally is not flush with the very top of your head. So I've drawn the outside outline. Now I need to show where the outline is in front of her face. So I am just drawing a line that will show where that is. And this will also kind of form the shape of the forehead too. And I'm having her hair cover her ears a little bit, so I might need to go back and erase some of those details and just keep working on the shape that I want around my face. And now that I have my shape, I can start adding some detail and value. I'm going to start along the hairline here to show some direction of the hair growth. And I'm adding some shadows and just really small wispy lines to show texture and direction. The lines look something like that, nice and light and wispy, not too dark and not too straight. So these initial lines are just kind of to show texture. Remember that your hair, if you have longer hair and you have a part, it kind of starts at the part and grows outward. So I'm adding some of that texture just around the face and around the part where you would definitely see a little more texture. So what I'm doing here is just adding a little bit more detail and showing where those kind of clumps of hair go. With wavy hair and curly hair, you kind of have these different clumps where you'll have strands that kind of stick together. And now I can add a little more texture value just along the face. And like I mentioned in the dreadlock portion, around your neck and jawline, you'll have a darker area because of the shadow from your hair. So I'm just continuing to add that texture, and it kind of creates some darker value just along the face and along the kind of top of the hairline as well. And that just shows where the hair starts and stops. Now I'm going to pick out where the ends of those kind of wave clumps are going to be and add some darker value there. And that shows where the hair kind of ends. And this person's hair is not all the exact same length. There's going to be some strands that are shorter and some strands that are longer. So I'm not only working on the very, very bottom of where my hair is, but also kind of throughout, anywhere where I think a strand might be either ending or kind of waving inwards towards the face is where I'm going to start adding some shadow. Again, notice these are really kind of light wispy lines. They're not super dark, and they also aren't straight. So I'm just going to keep on working on building that texture and value all throughout the hair. So wherever your hair would wave inwards towards your face, you would have a darker value, and wherever it waves outwards, you would show a lighter value, because that would be your highlight where the hair catches the light. So I have gotten a lot of my main areas of value kind of laid out, but now I'm just going to work on pulling out some darker values and maybe adding some texture where it looks like there might be a little bit of a blank spot. And I'm just going to keep on working with it and making sure that I'm not just using the same value everywhere, but I have that value contrast. So you need to make sure some areas are darker and some areas are lighter, and that will kind of create that illusion of form and depth that we are looking for. So from here on out, my goal is to make sure that my dark values are nice and dark, so I'm going back through and redefining those. And also where I might see any blank areas or areas where I don't have any texture yet, I will add some texture there. So just pay attention to how I am pulling out some of those darker areas, leaving some of those lighter areas nice and light to show highlights. And this is really about having your lines flow. Like if you have wavy, flowy hair, you're gonna have some wavy, flowy lines. You're not going to have super straight lines or any super dark lines that stand out, but rather just kind of a buildup of a lot of smaller, flowy lines. And you could kind of think of each of these wave details as having like a crest, like a real wave in the ocean would have. but they have this kind of a football shape, and the middle of that football shape is where the crest is, which is the part that would be the highest. You shade the ends, but then leave the middle a little bit more light for a highlight. And after kind of going through and pulling out highlights with my eraser and adding more details, blending where I think it needs to be blended, I will be finished with my wavy hair. Just be careful not to overblend. So for my next hairstyle, I am going to move on to doing some braids. So I'm going to show a little bit of an area that has cornrows and then some longer braids along with it. This style is more like thin braids, but you would follow the same principles if you were trying to draw, like if you wear your hair in one long, thicker braid. It would still be the same kind of shape and the same shading techniques as well. So I'm going to start by drawing the outline of my hair. It is not going to be exactly flush with the head because your hair grows a little bit above your head. And this is just really where the outline of the hair is. It's not super detailed right now. I'm just sketching it. And I am kind of sketching in front of the face too, because my hair is going to be in front of the face and in front of the ear. So you might need to erase different parts of the head and the parts that you don't need showing while you're drawing this. And I will also outline the other half of the hair, but this half is going to be tucked behind the ear, so I don't need to erase that. I'm also showing the line on this side. This is where the cornrows are going to be. I'm showing kind of the line where they're going to start. So I have an outline going for where my hair is going to be. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the outlines of where my cornrows are going to be. They're just lines that kind of curve with the curve of the head. And then I'm also going to define where my longer braids will be. And those you could think about kind of like the dreads. They're just long, skinny rectangles or cylinders that go from the length on top of the head and they grow downwards. So I'm going to break all that space up from my original outline and turn it into braids by just drawing those lines to break it down into some longer kind of rectangles here. So as you can see, I've created those basic braid shapes throughout my outline, and now I'm going to kind of create the shape of the cornrow. So there are just kind of stripes right now, but what I'll do is I'll take each of those kind of stripy lines and turn it into an actual shape. So I'm taking those stripes that I drew and I am making them thicker by adding a second line, and I also tapered it a little bit towards the front of the hairline because a lot of time the hair up there is thinner, so you'll have a thinner beginning. So I have just created the basic shape of the cornrows by doing that. And another thing I need to do is I need to make sure there's value in between them. So lots of times the scalp will still be showing, so I am going back in and adding the same value to match the skin tone. So now I'm going to show you the braid form itself. So we started with this basic kind of rectangle shape. Now we're going to draw sideways T's. So there's the top of the T, then the bottom, the top of the T, then the bottom, top of the T, then the bottom. So they just keep on lining up with one another all the way down the length of the braid. So we have this basic kind of T-shaped pattern within the braid. And then we will add some kind of just more volume to the end of each of those. So you can see they each kind of have its own section. So now I'm just rounding each of those sections out a bit so they don't look like a perfectly straight braid, because that's not how they actually look. And now I am just going to add that design inside each of the braid kind of shapes that I've made. It will take a little while because these are really small braids, but when I'm all done, it's going to look really good. And as you can see, I have switched to a mechanical pencil, and that's just because getting those really tiny, thin braids done with a regular pencil is a little bit difficult. So those little details are easier to do with a mechanical pencil. So now that I have made those slanty T-shapes to make the shape of the braid, I'm going to add that volume on the edges of my braids to make it look more realistic. So when I made those T-shapes, they kind of created these smaller sections. So each section will just get a curved edge along with it instead of a straight one. So just like I did with drawing the T's, I'm going to work my way with each braid and just add a little more of the texture to it. Since these braids are really, really skinny, I'm not paying too close attention to make sure every curve lines up perfectly with every section, but I am just making sure that my edge is not perfectly straight. I'm drawing a little bit more of a texture. And I'll do that with every braid that I have, including the cornrows on the top of the head. And here's just like a zoomed in version of what they look like. So they are kind of tapered at the end, and I have those slanty T-shapes to create the braid texture, and then I curve the edges a little bit. So that's what the cornrows look like, kind of up close. So now that I have added that dimension to my braids, the next thing to do is to add the value. So I'm just going to go along the edges of each of the braids, kind of like I did with the dreadlocks, and I'm going to add some value just to the right and left side, but I'll leave the middle as a highlight. So I'm not going to add much, if any, value to the very middle, but I'm going up the side of each braid and adding some value. If you have a bigger braid, the best thing to do is to add the value right in the corner of those sections that were made. But since these ones are so tiny, I can kind of just work my way up and down the sides without having to get too much into those super, super tiny details. So I'm just going to continue to add the value to each braid to create form, which makes it look more realistic and more three-dimensional. And another place where I'm going to focus on adding a little bit more value is next to the neck, kind of like underneath the jawline, because that area would be laying in shadow from being the underneath layer of the hair and having a shadow from being underneath the head. And here are my finished braids. And like I said, there's a ton of different styles and ways to do this, and this is just one of them. So my next style is going to be more kinky hair. So kinky hair is super curly, and it has a lot of volume to it. And I'm going to be drawing a hairstyle that is kind of styled more like an afro, but there are a lot of variations that you could do. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm just drawing an outline of where the hair is in relation to the head. And I started by kind of working off of this reference image that I had, and in the reference image his head was kind of tilted to the side, so it was uneven. But I think I'm going to correct that a little bit later on. And I'm just going through and kind of figuring out where the outline of the hair is. And in the reference image he had some in front of his face, so I'm drawing it there. And then you can erase any areas that would be covered by the hair, which here includes the top of the head and the ears as well. So now I've gotten that basic outline, I'm just going to go over it one more time to make it a little bit darker and easier for me to follow. And as I'm doing this, I'm not just making a straight line, I'm going to go back over and kind of create a hair texture. So this line is a little bit darker and it's a little bit more wavy or bumpy. It's not a perfectly straight line, because hair usually doesn't end up in a perfectly straight line. I'm just showing a little more of that texture as I am outlining the hair. And the next thing to do is just to add a base layer of value. So I'm not worrying too much about this looking perfect. I'm just getting a base value down that I can then add details to. So I colored a layer with my pencil, and now I'm just using my finger to smudge it around to try to get rid of some of those marks. And now is the point too where I'm going to try to make this look a little bit more even. Like I said, my reference image had the person's head tilted to the side, so their hair was a little bit to the side. So now I'm just trying to make it a little bit more even. And then within both kinky and curly hair, there are different types of kinks and curls. They're kind of based on loopy patterns, but they could be really close together. They could be so tight that it almost looks more like a zigzag, or they could be looser curls. So I'm drawing some that are a little bit looser, and I'm gonna start kind of at the base of the neck. And I'm also starting closest to the face a little bit kind of by the base of the neck. So I'm just taking those loopy curly lines and layering them on top of each other really close. And I'm going to do it nice and dark in this area because generally that's the area that will be in shadow. Next, I am going to just kind of spread some of these curls out. And keep in mind that your hair always grows from your scalp outward, so kind of follow that pattern. Anything will start from the base of the head or the top of the head and grow out towards the edge of where your hair ends up. It's not growing horizontally on the top of the head, it's growing up and out. And my reference image also had these looser curls that were hanging up in front of his face, but I decided that I would rather just do a look with tighter curls, and these kind of curls would grow more up and out and not hang down. So I just decided to get rid of those and then reform where my hairline's going to be, and then added curls growing up and out from there. So I'm just going to continue kind of dispersing some of these curly lines throughout the hair. And then after you've spent some time scattering those curly lines around, it is time to do some blending. And I just use my finger to kind of smudge all of that out. And now I'm going to keep on layering even more of these lines all throughout. So it's just going to kind of be a back and forth between blending, adding, and layering until eventually you end up with a little more texture and volume in your hair. So at this point, I'm just layering more of the curls throughout the hairstyle. And now I am blending those out. And as you can kind of see, I decided to make a little bit of a part in the hairstyle. And you can kind of show that by having a divot in the middle and then leaving that space a little bit blank. And what I'm doing here is I'm using my eraser to kind of make the edges a little bit more raw and not so perfectly circular. And I'm just continuing to add more of those kinky lines throughout my hair. And I'm kind of focusing on the areas that maybe look a little bit blank and just adding more wherever I feel that there should be more. So like I said earlier, it really is just a back and forth between blending and then adding more layers. And then I also use my eraser throughout time to kind of accentuate the edges of the hairstyle as well. And you can see here that I also decided that I wanted my part to be a little more noticeable, so I just erased a smaller divot down the middle. But then I changed my mind and I decided I wanted to not have a part, so all I did there is I just smudged some to cover up that divide, and then I'm layering some more curls in what used to be a blank spot. And here is my finished kinky hairstyle. As you can see, I've added a little more value near the bottom, close to the face. That's just because there would be some more shadow there that's cast by the hair itself and cast by the face. And now I'm going to show you a hairstyle that is curly with a little bit more loose curls, so they would hang more downwards. I'm going to start by drawing the outline of my hair. Notice I did it above the head because your hair is not flush with your head. And I'm also drawing where the hair goes in front of the face too. And I'm erasing the parts that would be covered by the hair. So in this one, it's the top of the head and the ears. So I have a general outline. And now I'm going back around that sketchy line that I drew, and I'm adding a more textured line. This line will help to show that the hair is curly. And there are different types of curls too. There's looser ones, medium ones, tiny tight curls. It all just depends on the person. So now I am adding a value to the hair so I can add some texture on top of that. I just laid down some pencil and used my finger to smudge it out. Now I'm deciding where my part is, and I'm starting to draw my curls closest to the kind of base of the neck because that area is going to be a little bit darker. So I'm just layering a lot of those loopy lines in that area. And now I am adding the loopy lines throughout the hairstyle. And notice that I am going to be doing a lot of smudging and drawing and stuff like that. It takes a lot of back and forth and a lot of layers to kind of build this up. And all of these lines are different lengths too. I'm not just drawing one line that goes all the way from the part to the bottom of the hair. I'm drawing a lot of smaller lines and building up the shape. And like I said, I'm going to be doing lots of drawing those layers and then smudging and then drawing more and then smudging because that helps to build up a little more depth in the hair. So after you've added a few more layers, you'll notice that some depth will start to build. And you can also use these lines to kind of accentuate the edges and the bottoms of the hair too. You don't want it to look too flat and straight. Lots of the times there would be lines that kind of stick out from the larger hairstyle, and that would help to make it look more realistic. So I really am just going to keep on building up layers and layers of these curly shaped lines. And the more layers you have, the more depth there will be in your hair. I'm also adding a few pieces that kind of fall in front of the face, and that just helps it look a little more realistic. And I'm also adding some little pieces that stick out as well. And it's also good to add a little more value around the side of the face. That kind of shows that the hair is kind of behind the face and that it might be in shadow. I'm also just going through and kind of picking out a few round spots just to add a little more dark spots too. And now I'm using my eraser to do the same thing. Just picking out highlights here and there just to add more contrast to my hair, which, as we know, that value contrast is going to be what helps it look a little more realistic. And here is my finished version of a curly hairstyle. So now I'm going to show you how to draw some longer straight hair. So the first thing that I like to do is I like to figure out where my part is going to be, and this person has a side part. Your hair will kind of start from that part and go down. So I'm drawing the outline of the hair. So it's going kind of across the face, over the shoulder, and it also is a little bit above the line of where the head would be, because your hair is very rarely exactly flush with your head. It's nice to have a little more volume. Now that I've drawn the outline of the hair, I am adding in some value. So I just drew some straight lines throughout, and I'm smudging them up. It's okay if they're not perfectly blended because we're going to end up with straight lines anyways. So to show my straight hair, I am just drawing some lines that start from the part and then work their way down the side of the head. But notice that they do still curve a little bit. That's because even if you do have straight hair, it would lay on top of your shoulders. It might be tucked behind your ear, which would cause it to move in a different way. So it's not just a perfectly straight line from the top of your head to the bottom of your hair. And then I will go ahead and just keep adding some of those layers to add more depth. I am going to accentuate that by blending and then layering more lines on top of that. And I'm also using my eraser to pull out some highlights. And the darkest part of your hair usually is at the base of the neck along the jawline because your hair would be in shadow from itself and from the shadow of your face. And here is my finished straight long hairstyle. And if you needed this to be shorter, you just have the hair end higher. So I showed you some braids earlier that would have included some cornrows, but I'm going to show you like a full cornrow hairstyle. So I'm going to start by figuring out where my hairline is going to be. Lots of the times with feminine hairstyles, they would have a more curved hairline, and more masculine hairstyles have sharper edges, so a little straighter across and on the sides. The hairline is also generally about halfway between the top of the head and the eyes. It depends on the person though. So now I'm adding the actual cornrow shapes, which I'm kind of treating like long, super skinny ovals. But you can see I've drawn a dot on the very top of the head. On the top of the head, each of those cornrows are going to kind of lead towards that dot. They don't all necessarily need to touch it, but if we were to draw them perfectly straight back, they would look really flat and wouldn't add any dimension to the head. So I'm just going around and I'm kind of defining where each of those shapes is. And then if you go back and watch the braid section, you can see me do a close-up of what I'm doing here. I'm just drawing these slanted T shapes to show the details and the textures of each braid. And cornrows come in all different lengths. Sometimes they might just stop near the back of the head. Sometimes they will turn into longer braids that would then hang down from the head. Sometimes those braids will be worn in a bun or a ponytail. There's a million different ways to wear them, but in this video I'm just showing is as if the braids were leading to a bun shape. So I've added a kind of dome or a half circle at the top of the head, and I'm drawing some lines kind of going in different directions to show the different strands inside of the bun itself. And as I've done this, I've lost a little bit of detail in my braids, so I'm just going to go back over them. And while I'm doing this, I'm also adding a line that gives a little more dimension to them by showing some texture. And like I said earlier, a close-up of this can be seen in the section where I did braids. So go back and watch that if you need to. And then for this style, I'm also going to have braids on the side of the head. So again, these aren't going to go straight back. I'm just going to show a few of those shapes kind of curving around the head and following that circular shape of the head. So I've drawn those shapes, and now I'll add the slanted T details, and I will add, make the outline have a little bit more texture so they look more realistic as well. And if you want them to look really realistic, what you need to do is add a little bit of value on both the left and right side of each braid. I'm leaving the middle a little bit blank or very light, and then if you add value on each side of the braid, it makes it look as if there is form and also makes it look more 3D. So now I pretty much have all of the braids done. I'm just going to add some more detail to my bun so that doesn't look just like an afterthought. And what I'm doing is I'm just adding some more value in that area. And I'm also adding just a little bit more detail here. Sometimes you might have baby hairs showing in front of the braids, so I just added some really short little wispy lines there. And there is my completed cornrow hairstyle look. So now I'm going to show you how to draw a ponytail with more straight hair. So there's a few different ways you can do this. But it's basically going to follow the same shape as I just did for the cornrows. So you're going to have like your hairline, and you'll have like the shape of the hair and lines leading from your hairline to where your ponytail is. But if you wanted to have longer hair showing over your shoulder, you could do that, because you probably wouldn't see the whole entire ponytail if you have a high pony. For this though, I'm going to make a low pony that you have a part with. So I've drawn my part, and now I'm drawing the outline of my hair. So it's going just a little bit above and to the outside, and then in front of part of the face, and then the ponytail itself is going to hang kind of over the shoulder. And the pony will be kind of above where the actual line of your head is, so I'm erasing anything that wouldn't need to show there. But I am keeping the ears because your ears would probably be showing. And since this is a looser pony, I'm adding some lines around the face, just kind of organic lines to show that maybe some hair is falling out. And now I can start adding some texture. So the first thing I'm going to do before I add the texture actually is just put a value down. So I'm shading it in, using my finger to blend, just so I have something that isn't white. So unless you actually have white hair, it won't be the same color as the paper. And now I'm just adding some lines that start at the part and grow outwards with the way that the hair would be laying on the head. So if it's laying flat, then these lines will kind of follow that shape and curve around the head. So I'm going to keep on adding these lines that create both value and texture throughout my hair. And if you had wavy or curly hair in a ponytail, you would just use those wavy and curly lines that I kind of went over in those sections of the video. But there's a finished ponytail with straight hair.